Recently, I had the opportunity to catch up with Kavin Mistry, a board certified neuroradiologist who has a new book out, Primal Health Design: Seven Key Paradigms to Reverse Biological Age. It was really fun talking to him, and we had a really interesting discussion about modern medicine and AI and ancient traditions as well, and kind of the blend between the two and what is being human. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Gail Winkleman, and today on the show, here with Kavin Mistry, a board certified neuroradiologist and author of the book Primal Health Design. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Gil.
Can you give a quick summary of the book for my listeners in case they haven't heard of it?
Sure, Gil. So my field is neuroradiology, which means I'm specialized in brain and spine imaging. And when I started in the field, I started seeing people on my screens who were 30, 40-year-olds who had brains and bodies that looked like they were 50 and 60. And it begged the question that, one, it didn't match any of the normals that I was looking at in my anatomy books. And it begged the question that what is going on? Are people aging faster biologically compared to their chronological age? Are we advancing? Do we have more advanced biological age? And so over the past 20 years, I decided to keep notes and take inventory of what are factors that are actually aging us. And looking at people who were particularly sort of had a big mismatch between their biological age and chronological age. But at the same time, I also saw exceptions. I saw 70, 80-year-olds who had brains and bodies that were looking like 40 and 50-year-olds. And
Wow.
I wanted to know what these outliers, now they were giving them a term called superagers, are doing right.
Yeah.
And so that all boiled down to seven key buckets or seven key paradigms, as I call them in the book. And so the book's title is Primal Health Design, Seven Key Paradigms to Reverse Biological Age. And it chronicles this journey and this concept of what are the key elements that really keeps us alive and that are vital for our aging process.
Awesome. And what are the seven paradigms in brief?
So the way I organized it in the book, Gil, is I take people on a journey from building our base, which is our physical health, which entails connecting with the elements of the earth, body, and food.
Hmm.
And then once that is stabilized, we can move on to the next dimension of health, which is our mental health, which is the mind-body connection.
Right.
And beyond that is the emotional health, which is connecting with ourselves, our purpose, and automatically that lends to connecting with others or connecting with our tribe.
Right.
And the last piece is the layer of existential health, which is connecting with our mortality. And so that gives us the seven connections there.
Nice, nice. And I found it's interesting that you're drawing on both science and some traditional sources. And you spent time in Tanzania, is that right? And that which led to some inspiration for the book?
That is correct, Gil.
Yeah.
My dad was with the United Nations and he worked on many projects, including a project by the World Bank, which entailed. One is that we moved around a lot. I've changed 22 houses in my lifetime,
Wow.
which is well, it's good and bad. One is that you're sort of moving around a lot. So as a child, you're never really have any roots anywhere. But
Right.
from a positive aspect, it made me see a lot of the world, and
Yeah.
made me very adaptable, made me very resilient. And part of my childhood was spent in Africa, in Tanzania, with some of the tribes there. And what's interesting is, as I got into this longevity space and I was studying these parameters that help us age more gracefully, and a lot of the literature was talking about primal cultures and how they have very low incidence of chronic diseases. And one of the tribes that is very heavily studied is the Hadza or the Hadzabe tribe in Tanzania.
Hmm.
And they were talking about how they have very low incidence of chronic diseases such as diabetes and blood pressure, and they have very negligible mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, and whatnot. And as I looked on the map and I said, okay, Tanzania, wow, I was there. And then I looked on the map and it said that the tribe is located, this many miles from this main city, Arusha, which is where I was very familiar with that. And I traced it. And it turns out the tribe that I hung out with as a child is the Hadza tribe that later
Wow.
on turned out to be what I'm studying in longevity. So it went all full circle where I said,
Oh,
aha, okay, well, maybe this was meant to be, right? So
for
when I
sure.
wrote
For
the
sure.
book, then the book came more from a lived experience rather than just theory. And so I could
Right.
talk about my childhood experiences and
Yeah.
incorporate them in the book.
Yeah. 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 And in terms of Earth as one of the paradigms, you talk about grounding with the natural world and the rhythms. Can you give an example of that? Because that's something I've talked about on the show, and I think my listeners would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure, we can talk about connecting with the earth on many different levels, but the first primary one is we know that the earth has its own cycle in terms of the circadian rhythm, right?
Hmm.
And as we look at these tribes out there, their daily routine is very much in sync with the circadian rhythm or the sunrise and the sunset. And what I tell people is that even though you think you may have your own schedule, and with all these artificial lighting and everything we have these days, very easy, if you could stay up all night if you want because you have the means and capability to do that,
Right.
which if you were in the wild and you would have to just take rest because the sun went down, because there's not very limited things you could do after the sun went down, right? Maybe you
Right.
could sit by the fire and whatnot, but you were certainly not roaming the jungle, after sunset. So what I tell people is that our modern society is only a few hundred years old, or even if you look at some of the more advanced cultures, they're only a few thousand years old. But you compare that to primal man, which has a history of hundreds of thousands of years. So
Right.
your genetics have evolved for hundreds and thousands of years with the circadian rhythm. So your genes are following the circadian rhythm. Whether
Right.
you do or not, your
Right.
genetics is following the circadian rhythm, which means that your body is, in a sense, responding to the sunrise and sunset, whether you decide to do that or not. So hormones in your body, digestive juices in your body are all going up and down based on the circadian rhythm. Now, if you don't sync with that, then it's an issue because then there is this misalignment, and that's what
Right.
ages us faster.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting that last time we had talked about digestive enzymes working more efficiently when the sun's up. And I think about New York City, like no one eats before the sun, you know, while the sun's up. You go out, you have small lunches and go out to dinner after this, and and you get a lot of light there. I mean, there's like almost no time in the day, at least in Manhattan, where it's dark. So it's challenging, I could imagine, if you live in a big city.
It's absolutely challenging, and I'm a realist at the same time, where I don't think that people can pack up and move to the jungle and be
Right,
100% primal. But at the same time, we have to understand what our primal design is. If we
right.
understand that our body naturally is following the cycle, and our digestive system is also naturally following the cycle. If you read, interestingly, some of the literature, some from Ayurvedic medicine, right? And
Right.
they talk about how our digestive juices follow the circadian rhythm, and that midday, when the sun is at its highest peak, is when you have the most digestive capacity.
A lot of what you're talking about is reminding me of the blue zones and some of the work that the blue zones has had. And I'm curious what you see about that, similarities, differences in terms of what you're doing and the blue zones work.
Sure, Gil. I do incorporate some of the research from the blue zones in the book, and it
Uh,
is worth mentioning because the blue zones are areas of the world where there's a higher percentage of people over the age of 100, and it is worth mentioning because they do study these cultures and these populations and looking at their habits and are trying to find like the underlying element. But if you look at everything as a totality, everything comes back to primal design, because
right.
it is the same thing, is that people at some level, I believe, are resonating with those same seven primal connections in terms of connecting with the earth, body, food, mind body connection, and everything we talked about in terms of
Yeah.
emotional health and existential health.
Yeah. Yeah. And the existential health, now that you mentioned that, is really interesting because purpose is one of the things that you mentioned. And can you say more about that? Because I think that's something that really gets missed in medicine a lot.
I agree, Gil. We spend a lot of time optimizing physical health, for sure, with all the wellness programs and everything like that. I mean, certainly there's such a plethora of content out there on that, and there's also a lot of content on mindfulness, meditation, and everything like that, with the mind body connection. I think the piece that gets ignored in this whole process is this piece of emotional health and existential health. And
Mhm.
one of the things I see right now and that people are struggling with is this idea of misalignment, particularly in their work. And a lot of people out there, one of the questions I get asked is, what do you think about uh, burnout in the industry? Why do you
Mhm.
think people are burning out? And from my perspective, burnout is a misalignment issue and not a work overload issue. And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So my wife is an artist. Her painting is actually hanging behind me, and so
Beautiful. Beautiful.
she
Yeah.
she's an artist, and she can work 12, 15-hour days and still be super energized. It is not a question of work overload when your work is aligned with your values and your purpose. And I believe that all of us have a certain calling, a certain unique inner drive or constitution. Some of us are thinkers and thought leaders. Some of us are more connectors. Some of us are meant to be more of seekers. And when we connect with that primal drive, then we are in alignment with that. And
Mhm.
if we're not in alignment with that, then we hit friction and everything feels like it's an uphill battle. And that's when we hit this idea of burnout.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I was just talking to someone a couple days ago, a nurse who's she's been doing it for years and completely burned out, and I thought about that. I'm like, Maybe you need to be doing something else, at this point." But I didn't say anything, but it did make it does make me wonder. It's like, oftentimes we think we're in the wrong field when in fact, it's not that we're in the wrong field, we're doing the wrong thing in the field.
And that's true, and that's a good point, Gil. Is that I'm not saying that people need to leave that particular career or that field, but you have to identify roles within your work
Right.
that align with what your strengths are,
Right.
and maybe you're creative and maybe find outlets in your job that allow for that creative expression. Or maybe you're a communicator and maybe you need to take a more of a forward facing role at your work where you're more engaged with people, so that you get that exposure to communicate and collaborate and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people need to ask themselves that question: that what are my strengths? What gives me more life? You know,
I it reminds me of some of the work of Carl Jung and the people who followed him, particularly Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson has a book, I think it's called Inner Work, where he talks about it, and it's kind of the basis for Myers-Briggs. I mean, but it's like figuring out where your lead quality is, right? And then the supporting ones that lead you into a particular direction. So if you're an intuitive and you're working in, say, construction, that's probably a bad match, right?
correct.
I mean, so it's kind of a similar idea. But you do work in corporate settings as well, helping companies with
Correct.
this.
So some of my work has translated into the corporate arena, and
Uh-huh.
particularly as AI is being implemented across many fields, what we're seeing is, particularly me coming from the neuroscience side and the wellness side,
Right.
what we're seeing is that the way we think and way we engage with people is drastically changing with AI implementation. And my big push is that there is technology has its own advantages, but we have human qualities that have their own advantages as well. And I think the way forward is going to be with AI and PI, or what I call as artificial intelligence plus primal intelligence.
Hmm.
And so the way forward is going to be a combination of both of those.
And as it should be. I mean, there's actually been some interesting discussion about this in terms of AI in various arenas. And, even I think I saw this interview where this guy had talked to Claude about this, Anthropic's AI persona. And Claude was basically like, well, my job is to give the choices to the humans, but the final decision is in the humans' hands. And it's not, and clearly in many cases, it's not being used that way. So, but your point, you're saying, yes, let's use it this way. Let's use AI for what it's good at, kind of like the people, right? We all have a particular thing that we're good at. AI has that good thing, but it doesn't have everything.
I was having this conversation, Gil, with somebody, and I was trying to think of an example. And one of the example that I thought of, and it works well here. Is that when we came out with the shoe, right? It was a technology, right? It was a technology. All of a sudden, people realize, wow, we don't need to walk barefoot. We can actually have this layer of cushioning and there, and protects us from the elements. Great thing. Shoes allows us to climb mountains. It allows us to walk these, rough terrains and whatnot. So it has its advantages. But at the same time, we have to recognize what the shoe takes away. One
Hmm.
is that direct connection with the earth, so you don't have the electrochemical effects. You lose the biomechanical effects on the bones of your feet. So your arch becomes different. Your
Yeah,
mechanics, your biomechanics change. The third is that you don't have direct contact with the soil. So the whole idea of that microbiome, the microbes being absorbed from the skin and all that
yeah,
changes. So great technology. It allows us to do great things, but we have to know what we're giving up.
right.
And AI is just another shoe. And it's going to allow us to walk on these great terrain, climb mountains, which is great. But we have to also realize what are we giving up?
That is such a great example. I mean, because it's like, yeah, of course we're gonna wear shoes, you know? And, 200 years from now, of course we have AI. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of the same. How did we do things before that? I mean, think of I talk to my kids now. How did you know, such and such before Google? It's like, well, we had this thing called books, encyclopedias, you know? That's what we did. You'd look it up. You wouldn't know
I
right
know.
away.
The concept of a physical encyclopedia is so archaic,
Right.
and I think used a bit of it. I think when I was like really, really, I guess maybe in grammar school or something like that, and then afterwards it kind of phased out. But that concept now is just seems silly that
It
you'd print all this information on these very expensive books and store them and all this stuff.
my my parents had this encyclopedia that was published in 1939. So it didn't have World War II in it.
Okay.
And so I was like, "Huh, I wonder what's in World War One." And World War One isn't in there, right? But it's under the Great War. It's like, wow, this is like it was really interesting, and it was an Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's like, okay, so, within 10 years, it's completely updated, totally different, you know, kind of material, discussion. It was an interesting anyway, see to hear what we'll leave it at that, but we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, I wanna ask you more about your book, and particularly about protecting the brain and alignment versus optimization. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Ask Dr. Gill. I am your host, Dr. Gill Winkleman, and I'm talking with Kavin Mistry. And so we're talking about his book, Primal Health Design. I wanted to ask you about something you talk about, which is protect your brain first. And that's a really interesting concept in terms of the physical. Can you say more about that?
So, Gil, this is coming into light more and more as we engage with AI technology. And we touched upon that a little bit before the break.
Yeah.
But this is going to be a huge issue as we go forward. And the issue is that as we use AI technology, which is great from productivity purposes, from sort of automating mundane tasks and everything like that. But the question is that what are we giving up in that process?
Hmm.
And if you're saving time with putting AI to work by automation, what are you doing with that time to as a person? Are you becoming more or less? And that's the
Hmm.
question I always ask a crowd or when I'm speaking is that is AI technology making you more or less? And what I mean by that is that if you implement AI and you have this extra time, you can actually now spend that time to improve yourself in the human qualities that only humans can do, and
Right.
in aspects that only humans are good at. And if you're not doing that, and if you use that extra time to again engage with more technology to scroll social media feeds, then you've missed out because one, you've lost that connection.
Mhm.
And then you have become, what happens is now that you have lost uh, that task aspect of it, but at the same time, you now have also given up that opportunity to become more human in the aspects that really define us. And there are five elements that I talk about.
Uh,
That one is the only thing that the things that we can do that technology cannot do. One is that we are present, which AI is not present. We have presence,
mhm.
and it's a unique human quality. The second is we have the capacity to focus on one thing and develop what I call as mastery. Is we can develop and myelinate certain tracks by doing certain things, and we can develop mastery in an area. For example, my forefathers, my last name Mistry means a woodworker, a master
Oh,
woodworker.
uh-huh.
And so they were very accomplished woodworkers, and that's where the name Mystery comes from.
Oh, interesting.
And
Yeah.
so they developed this mastery that could not be replicated, and is because of this many, many years of training and that program their fine-tuned their hands and had that mind-body connection. So we talk about being present, being having that undistracted focus. And then the third point is one that we talked about already is having that inner drive or meaningful, having meaning, which is also a very unique human quality. And it's
Right.
what keeps us alive, it keeps us young. And when you don't have that meaning, which AI doesn't have that aspect, it's really not for AI, whether it does task A or B, it doesn't matter. It's not chasing meaning,
Right.
right? Which
Right.
is very unique. And when you're chasing meaning, when you're chasing purpose and passion, that truly drives your health, as we mentioned. Yeah.
It's interesting because the 7 paradigms you mentioned, purpose, tribe, cosmos, the last 3,
Yeah.
are totally untouched by AI. And that's
Absolutely.
and those are the 3 where, I think back to some of the ads in the early part of the 20th century for like a dishwasher or a washing machine. And if you look at those ads, they talk about how these tasks buy this so that you can spend more time with your family. And that isn't necessarily what happened with the technology, right? But that was sort of the way it was sold. And it is pointing to those 3 things, right? You have more time to do other stuff, to be a parent, to whatever it is. We kind of put ourselves on a treadmill, and maybe that's the danger with AI, is that what you're pointing at is to not do that, to not try and do more, but to try and be more as part of this.
I think you put that well, Gil, is that what are we doing with that extra time? Are
Yeah.
you doing more of the human element, or are you doing more of the analog activities that AI cannot replace, or are you just doing more AI? Are you
Right.
using that time to engage more with technology? Because here's the greatest opportunity. It's the greatest opportunity and the greatest curse at the same time.
Yep.
AI automates things, now gives you an opportunity to be more human if you choose to be. You can take that time and develop qualities in you that are uniquely human. You can become more purposeful, develop more passion, develop those unique relationships that are meaningful to you, and overall maybe chase a larger purpose in life, a larger cause, something that you can really leave behind even after you're gone. And here's a great opportunity to do that. Or you can use that extra time and productivity and just do more social media and
Mhm.
more TikTok and doom scroll and everything like that, which seems like most people are. That's what they're doing
That's
with
what
that
they're doing.
extra capacity. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Carolyn Mace who gives an example when she's talking about purpose. And I love this example because it's so mundane, but so beautiful at the same time, which is maybe your purpose is to live in a neighborhood and be a grounding influence for the people around you. And that's the reason you are alive. And it's so beautiful, right? Because the meaning there, and if you can engage, if you can see that for yourself and be engaged with that, it's like none of this stuff matters, right? It's just how do I be present with the people around me? And I happen to live in a place where, you know, in Hawaii, there's a term called talk story. And you just all you do is you hang out with your neighbors and talk. And it's less prevalent in Honolulu, but when I lived in a different part, in the country, that's all people did. Like, I mean, it's not all that they did, but it was like both refreshing and very unfamiliar for me because, I'm a city boy. I've grown up in fa- fast-paced things and that sort of thing. But that's the essence of this, and that's, I think, the essence that you're talking about with tribe, and also the blue zones concept of having a cohort, that sort of thing. And AI doesn't give us that at the end of the day. Technology doesn't. Yeah.
So I think as you just mentioned, the future is what we make of it.
Mhm.
The future is going to be what we make of it. And I think that AI can be extremely advantageous, actually, if you use it properly,
Yeah.
because the capacity for you to be able to learn new things and automate some of that stuff that was really bogging you down can also give you the time to be really more human. And I'll give you an example. If you look back 5 years, and when a doctor walked into a room, they were so stressed because they had to chart everything for the insurance, right? So they would walk into
Right.
a room, then they would walk and they'll put the laptop right in front of you as they're talking to you, and they're charting as they're talking to you because they would need to get all that information in for billing purposes, right?
Right.
And now, actually, because and most of the doctors' offices, I think some of them, most of the people who can afford it, have these AI agents. So they walk into a room and they'll have this AI agent listening to the conversation and taking notes and charting in the background. Now they have an opportunity to be more human and connect with the patient. And here's an example where we've used technology to become more human, right? To
Right.
improve that connection. And I think that that's just one example, but there are more and more opportunities like that
Right.
where we can automate all the mundane tasks so we can actually focus on being more of who we are.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Let me kind of use this opportunity to segue to another question and another thing you wrote, which is alignment beats optimization. And and I'm really curious about that. And if you could say more, that would be awesome.
So Gil, the big idea here is that if you look at a lot of the wellness fads out there right now, it is all about optimization, right? It is all about optimize your routine and optimize your energy and but when you look at optimization, I'm all for it. I'm all for optimization. Except you can not optimize a physiology that is out of alignment with its
Mm,
primal design, right? So if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, and then next day you say that I need to optimize and I need to optimize my energy. So I'm going to take this energy shot, and I'm going to take this energy drink and really get energized now, because but you cannot optimize your next day if you're sleeping less than 6 hours, because you just misaligned with your whole rhythm of what your
Right.
body needs, right?
Right.
Same thing if you look at our physical alignment in terms of our posture. And if people don't have proper posture and proper neck alignment and thoracic alignment and lumbar alignment, which I teach, that what is your primal alignment, if that alignment is off, and now you say, I want to optimize my physiology, I'm going to do my hit training, I'm going to do everything like that. Now you're doing this optimization with a misaligned body. It's going to
Right.
actually lead to more harm and than good. So
Yeah.
those are just two examples of where there's nothing wrong with that ambition to optimize, but when it's done out of a space of misaligned physiology, it can lead to more problems, more good than bad.
It's interesting because I've just created an audiobook from around something about restoring yourself. And it's like a lot of the protocols that we give people are designed for are often harmful to someone if they're depleted. And that's kind of what this is about, this audiobook is about. And it's the problem is, to your point, is that when you introduce something into a system that can't contain that, it could be vitamin C, for example. A high dose vitamin C can be harmful to someone if their body isn't able to take that in and deal with it. And it's a simple example. It's pretty rare with vitamin C, but um, and to your point about the spinal alignment, I've had patients get injured doing yoga, and it's like, because it's not the yoga, it's that the curvature of their spine was such that anything that they were doing was they were fighting that. So that's a really interesting thought. And with that, what suggestions do you have for people in terms of the alignment piece, that you can share real quickly? Yeah.
So my premise, Gil, is that before we implement any external fixes, that let's make sure we are on track with our primal alignment and make
Right.
sure that is optimized, because a lot of times just that alignment fixes 90% of the problems. For example, uh, um, uh, a man goes to his doctor and they do a testosterone level, and his testosterone level is low. Now he gets diagnosed with a low T, and then all of a sudden this guy wants to go on hormone replacement therapy, right?
Right.
Sounds perfectly fine, right? But has anybody asked him that, is what is his sleep routine? Is he
Right.
getting 6 hours of sleep? Is his movement, is he getting enough of a physical exposure? Is he moving his larger muscles to give that testosterone, that the signal to produce that testosterone? We know
Yeah.
that when you're working out your quads and you're doing certain, like, lifting exercises and squats and things like that, you can naturally raise your testosterone. Sleep, lack of sleep less than 6 hours, impacts your testosterone levels. So
Right.
if if we don't address those factors, and now we just put this guy on hormone replacement therapy, we still haven't addressed the primal alignment aspect, and now we're giving this guy exogenous testosterone.
Right.
I'm not against it. All I'm saying is that, shouldn't we address those issues first and see if that is the root cause of it? You know.
Exactly. Exactly. I completely agree with you. I mean, we see this all the time, as far as this goes with whatever treatment it is. And by the way, it can be natural treatments too. I mean, I see this with that as well. Instead of treating the basics, if you will, of things. So, So anything else that you'd like to say about your book or your offerings and before we go?
So, Gil, what I would say is that this is a journey. It's an individualistic journey. I think that people need to create their routine. The title of the book is Primal Health Design, and the concept is that you need to build up your you may want to make sure you're living in alignment with your primal design. One of the resources I have, Gil, on my website, it's my full name, which is Kavin, Kavin Mistry, MISTRYMD.com. So
Uh-huh.
all of it together, KavinMistryMD.com.
And that'll be in the show notes, by the way.
Sure.
But yeah.
And that website has a free assessment. It's a primal alignment index assessment that I have
Oh,
on there.
awesome.
And what that
Yeah.
is what happened is that over the years, people always ask me these questions. How do you think, what do you think my alignment is? How primal you think I am? And I used to ask them all these questions. And how do you know? And so after a while, I got tired of like just asking the same questions. I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to compile all these questions into this assessment.
Uh-huh.
And so I made it available free for everybody. So it's on
Oh,
the website. It's a free assessment. You can go to the website, take the assessment. It will take you a few minutes,
uh-huh.
maybe 2, 3 minutes,
Uh-huh.
and it will go through a series of questions, and it will go through questions that relate to all 7 paradigms, all 7 primal connections. And at the end of the assessment, it will give you a score. And it's a score, I believe it's out of 100 or 105, which is like the maximal score. It will give you a score, and it will tell you what your gaps are. And what's
Oh,
interesting is for a lot of people, it's very revealing, because some people think that, a lot of people that I interact with are from a physical health point of view are in good shape. They're doing a lot of things with that, but they don't realize that there are also many of these components related to mental health and emotional health they
yeah.
never paid attention to. And the assessment kind of brings that to light and says that, hey, here are the gaps. And so after that, people have a couple of choices. One, you'll know where you're lacking, where the gap is. You
Right.
can choose, and the assessment will also give you some content that you can use to fill those gaps. So there are chapters in my book that you can read to fill those gaps.
Oh, awesome.
And beyond that, there's also a master class I have. It's an online class which it will also suggest some modules in that master class, which you can use to kind of optimize those gaps you have in your life. So
Oh,
these are
that's
all the
awesome.
resources that are available
Oh,
for the listeners.
that's great. That's great. I'll put that in the show notes, like I said, and people can check it out and see what it is, where their gaps are. I think that's great that you have that because I do think this is a piece of medicine that we need to start addressing more. A and, we're so focused on the physiology aspect of things, but we're so much more than that. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
and I think that ultimately more and more, we're realizing that the our overall wellness, and we can kind of end with this, and we may have spoken about this, the longest running study, the Harvard study, which is like I think 75 plus years, right? And they looked at all these factors, right, in terms of whether you're smoking or not, movement, exercise, everything like that. It turned out then that they were trying to find factors that are most impact your wellness and happiness. And it
uh-huh,
turned out, out of all the things, which at first I thought it was going to be something like about whether you smoke or not, or something like that. It
yeah,
turned out it was the quality of your relationships.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
was so revealing, where with everything on the table, it turned out it's like the quality of your relationships determines your overall wellness and well-being and happiness, which begs the question that we definitely need to have a more comprehensive approach.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and, it was definitely enlightening, and, hopefully the listeners, you guys enjoyed this, and if you have any questions or comments, put them below in the show notes or below the show notes. We'd be love to hear what you have to say, and, thanks again.